Today is November 16th, 2022. My name is Katherine Neurohr. I'm a librarian at the Oklahoma State University Library in Stillwater, but I'm in Visalia, California now to do an interview with Katherine Andes about the late Okie poet and writer Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for coming today to allow me to do this interview with you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, it's hard to know where to start. I was born and raised here in the Central Valley in Hanford, California. And let's see, after high school and college, I have varied careers. I dabbled in the entertainment industry. I did some acting for a while in commercials, and I was the first female voiceover booth announcer network in Southern California.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I would go, stay tuned for Happy Days. So that was my biggest claim to fame. And then I segged into working on screenplays, with working for small production companies. I'd read plays, meet with writers, and, that kind of thing. And I did work on one film that actually got produced with Sidney Poitier. That was cool.
What was the name of that film?
Shoot to Kill. And you won't see my name in the credits. If I had not gotten pregnant, I would have gotten a producer credit, because the woman who took my place in the company after I left was a producer on the film. But I was the one who brought the script to them and told them this is a script that has to be done. And so anyway, but I have some that's where I started working a little bit more with writing and that kind of thing. And then I had my baby and I became a stay-at-home mom. We moved back to my hometown from LA because we didn't want to stay in LA. And as a stay-at-home mom, I started to do a little bit of writing and editing, just part-time, just sort of to keep up my skills. And I was, during that period, I wrote for the Fresno Bee, just columns, things like that, slice of life columns. And I'd had some articles published in some magazines as well. And then I was editing a newsletter for a crisis pregnancy center. And that's how I met Wilma, was through that.
So tell me more about that newsletter. The Crisis Pregnancy Center, who was that affiliated with or sponsored by?
They were on their own, It was a local thing to help women who were pregnant and who, help them to not choose abortion. And Wilma was very pro-life. And one day I got a phone call from her asking if she could contribute to the newsletter.
So she was receiving the newsletter?
Mm-hmm. She was. And I did not know her personally, although she did go to my church, St. Bridget's. But I knew who she was.
What town was that?
Hanford. It was in Hanford. She lived in Hanford for a few years. And my reaction to her, I still remember it, was, I would love to have a Wilma McDaniel poem in our newsletter, because I knew about her she had had a lot of local press. There had been a lot of local press about Wilma. So I was very aware of who she was. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I was real familiar with her work. I just don't remember that. But I was very familiar with who she was and had a lot of respect for her. And so that's how we got started. And I don't know how long she wrote for us. It was at least a year, might have been 2 years, because I did not continue in that position as my kids got older and I started homeschooling. Mm-hmm. It was too much for me to do. But during that time, when she contributed poems and short stories, she always spoke in later years about those were the golden years, when she looked fondly upon publishing in that little newsletter. She just always called them the golden years, which I thought was interesting.
That is. How frequently did that newsletter, was it published?
Just monthly.
A monthly newsletter.
And I think I still have those in my files if you ever wanted them, or I could probably go back and see how many years she did actually contribute. I just don't remember right now.
So, talk to me about the communication that you had with her. So it started with a telephone call. Were there in-person visits?
Oh, yeah. I would go over and pick up things from her. My kids were really little. As I recall, my youngest was 2, my son, and my daughter was 4. And I recall going over to her house, and her sister Opal was alive at that time. And Opal was such a sweetheart with children. These 2 little old ladies who never had children of their own. And Opal immediately whisked my children into the kitchen to have them do some artwork while Wilma and I could visit. And so we immediately, and then, when I discovered she was a Catholic like me and went to the same parish, knew a lot of the same people. So we had an instant bond. Religiously, her and Opal, they came from the Bible Belt, so I was always kind of interested about how they became Catholics, but I still have no idea how they were so private. I'm sure she kind of hinted at it, but it wasn't anything I could get a grip on. But I can remember they were very sweet. I can remember, seeing them at church, like during the week, just going in to pray. And then when they were leaving, I don't know if it was Opal, I think it was Opal, but it might have been Wilma. They were both blowing kisses to Jesus as they left.
Oh, interesting.
They were just really sweet that way, both of them.
Describe the house for me.
It was an apartment. It was a duplex side by side. And they had a lot of religious icons in the windowsill. Beyond that, it was very modest. Clean, very clean, simple.
About what year was this?
Mid-90s.
When you first met them?
Yeah, I'd say 93, 94. I'm not sure. I could look and see what some of the earliest correspondence was, if there's any dates on it. 91. So here's something. So it'd be 91, 92, it looks like.
Okay.
Earlier than I thought.
And even after you left the newsletter, were you still in touch?
Oh, yeah.
Over the years?
Yeah, we never lost contact. Never. So, and in her older years, when she was in Tulare, I used to try and visit her every week. Yeah, with my kids. So, I was always visiting Wilma.
Tell me about her personality and her mannerisms.
She was funny. She was, she could get mad. She'd get mad at her brother a lot. And she could be a little selfish. She was very humble, but she also knew that she was kind of a queen, But she was very, very private about her personal life. She would talk literature. She would talk theology. Now, what was interesting about her, from a religious perspective, she was very, and you can see it in her writing, she had a real respect for humble and simple theology. But she also was someone who read Thomas Aquinas. I don't know if it was literally Thomas Aquinas that she read, but it was people like that. She was very, during her conversion period, I do remember her telling me about some of the books she read, and I was very impressed with them. I don't remember for sure if it was Thomas Aquinas or just someone like it, but that's the one that sticks out in my mind. So she was a combination of sophisticated and simple, So.
You said that she would become angry at her brother. What kinds of things?
Oh, who got the most soup at lunch or this is when she was a lot older.
Oh, yeah.
I think she was really close to him too because he would come over and play cards with her every day.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think what happens when we get older, whatever eccentricities we have, they just get turned up. And they certainly did in Wilma. I saw that in her later years. Her eccentricities got a little turned up.
Did you ever see her writing?
No. No, I never saw her writing. But I remember being real impressed at her giving me writing. She didn't want to waste. And she'd take like a cereal box and cut it up and write a poem on a cereal box and turn it in. Because she didn't want to waste paper. So that and I do remember distinctly her handing me, her writing wasn't real good, although this is pretty good. It must have gotten worse in her. This one actually is pretty clean, but I think in later years it wasn't so clean. Mm-hmm. And I remember she gave me a poem to type up. And I remember thinking, oh man, this is going to be a mess once it's typed up. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. To me, it was like chicken scratch when I looked at it. And then once I typed it up, I went, this poem's perfect.
Do you remember what poem it was?
No.
No. Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah, that's okay.
But, yeah. So
did you do a lot of typing for her?
No, I did not. I didn't have that kind of time. I think she would have liked me to, but there was just no way I could do that with raising my kids.
Mm-hmm. Did she ask you for things?
No, she never. She was really good. She didn't do that. Mm-hmm. I think she just appreciated the company. When she was here in Tulare and older, I used to take food over to her. Betty and I both did that. Mm-hmm. We would say, okay, I'm taking some stuff to Wilma, and we kind of coordinate that. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I did it as much as I should have, but I did do it.
What else do you know about her family?
I don't really know about her mom and her dad, except I really don't know anything about her family, except I've read in poems and just meeting her brother. Did you interview her? Her brother's died.
I did, Roy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so okay, all right, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see that interview. I'd be interested in what his impressions were. But, did he respect her as much as he should? Like, that's my question about, did he appreciate her talent, do you think? Or did he take it for granted?
He recognized that it was innate to her, I think, and that's who she was. She was a writer. Mm-hmm. The interview is online. I can send you the link.
I'd love that. Yes, I would love that.
Okay. Did she ever speak of her heritage?
I don't recall that. I just don't.
Or how she identified herself?
She was Okie and white.
She identified herself as an Okie?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, yeah. I mean, I don't know if she ever said that to me, in words or anything, but she was proud of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was proud of where she came from, even though she definitely was a Californian by the time she was here, too. She embraced both worlds, I think.
And when she moved, you first met her when she was living in Hanford.
Correct.
And then she moved.
She moved to Tulare. Mm-hmm. And she always talked about that's where she was going to stay until she moved across the street. And across the street was the cemetery.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever go there with her to the cemetery?
No, I did not.
Did you go to the memorial service? Tell me about that.
Gee, I don't remember it very well. I do remember it was a pretty day and the cemetery was lovely. And I thought, Wilma was right. She she did what she said she was going to do. but it was nice. It was pleasant. But.
Mm-hmm. Did she ever talk about jobs that she held over the years?
Not really. She really was a writer.
Mm-hmm.
She was a writer. That was her job, to be a writer. She would talk to me about editors, and she sent something here or something there. And she would show me, she gave me a lot of books. You know, like at home, I have books signed for Christmas. She calls me her young friend.
Oh.
And so she was always very proud of being published.
Mm-hmm.
And that was her world, was to be published and to hold court in her little apartment to the people who came and went. But I wasn't really in her wider literary circle. I met the fellow who did the Valley Voice. Who was that? Jim.
Jim Klebda?
Yeah, he used to come around. A lot of times he'd be dropping off the paper when I was visiting, so I knew him and through Betty.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I wasn't a part of her wider intellectual circle. But she always said it was the golden years with me.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Love that.
Maybe she said that to everyone. I don't know.
No, I think it was just you.
Oh, thank you.
Did she ever talk about education? Her thoughts on education or schools? That she
No,
went
but
to?
I think she respected it. You know, she went to COS, and she had respect for professors and things like that. She had a lot of respect for them.
Did she talk about favorite authors or poets?
You know, she probably did, but we didn't really usually talk other people's books. She liked to talk about her own. But there's something in me that says she liked Emily Dickinson. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong about that. But there's just something in my mind that says that. So I'm going to let it out because usually your first instincts on things like that are correct.
Mm-hmm. Would she read her poems to you when you visited her?
She might have. A few here and there. Not a lot, though.
How long would you stay typically when you
an hour to 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was she hospitable? Did she offer tea or refreshments or anything that you remember?
No, but the kitchen was there and I could help myself.
Oh,
you know? Yeah. She was welcoming. Yeah. Wilma, yeah. But when you went to visit Wilma, it's more like paying court, you know. And not in a bad way, though. In a nice way. You know, you just sort of knew she was special.
Did she seem strong or frail?
That's interesting. Physically, she was kind of frail, you know. But she seems strong to me. It's not strong in the way that we think of it today, where everybody's self-sufficient and has a high-powered job and has a lot of money in the bank. It wasn't that. She was strong in who she was. And she knew her talent. Even if the world didn't, she knew it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's a lot for someone to be able to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me when I hear about, you know, that man you were saying that you interviewed, the teacher, and how he helped her. That there was a period in a time in her life when she wasn't sure, you know, about her talent. But by the time I met her, she knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she would have already had a number of things published when you met. Yeah. Did you help her find a publisher for anything?
No, I didn't. It's funny. When I was at UCLA, I knew some poets. I roomed with some poets. So I was kind of involved in some of the poetry scene back in the early 70s, and I called it piss and shit poetry. Made me dislike poetry. Mm-hmm. It's just ugly, you know, just ugly poetry. Looking at the cockroach side of life from unhappy people. Mm-hmm. So actually, when I read her poetry, it was like, oh, I love poetry again. Really.
Mm-hmm.
So
Let's go back to the newsletter that she was submitting things for. And it was a crisis pregnancy newsletter. Were her writings geared toward the purpose of the newsletter?
at the beginning, but after that, then I published things that were not necessarily, they were just nice stories for our readers to read.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't, really, I can only remember one poem that was on point to that. And it's the only poem I'm aware of where she's outwardly pro-life. I'm not aware of any other poems, but it was a real powerful poem.
Do you remember the gist of it?
It's The Abortionist is the name of it. And it's about a neighborhood where this man arrives in a Mercedes with a hawk-eyed look. And then at the end it says, as he enters the clinic door, Herod the Great comes alive. And,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's real powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I have it here if you
Do
want
you?
it. Mm-hmm. It's it's probably one of my favorite poems of hers.
Hmm.
But that's the only one I know of that was directly pro-life.
What was the circulation from the newsletter?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't. Shot probably 1,000 people, maybe 500.
Mm-hmm. Did people subscribe to it?
No, it was, you send it out so you hope you get donations back, with your envelope.
Okay.
So as a newsletter, just to stay in touch with your donors. I'm sure actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably only 300 or 400 people.
Okay. So that was a nonprofit group.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still in existence?
Uh-huh.
Is it?
Mm-hmm. They still send out their newsletter. It's not as good.
Mm-hmm.
So she was a Franciscan too, a lay Franciscan, and she loved that. Oh, she loved that. She loved going to their retreats up at Three Rivers. And she loved that she was going to be buried in a brown Franciscan robe. And if you went to her funeral, the lay Franciscans, they chant beautifully. So they were all singing for her for when she was buried. And now all the ones that knew her have, they've all passed on. They're still around, but they don't remember her very well. There might be one or two who vaguely remembers her. But.
Did anything about her surprise you?
Surprise me. The only thing that ever surprised me was that she didn't like it that Blacks were getting more attention than Okies for being oppressed.
Oh, interesting.
It wasn't that she disliked Blacks, but it was like, hey, we're oppressed too.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of surprised me. That was all.
Mm-hmm. Did she speak about Native Americans?
All of them. Native Americans got more. We were oppressed too. The Okies were oppressed too.
Oh.
She kind of didn't like that,
Mm-hmm.
So if I brought up a subject like that about something, she'd say, well, we're oppressed too. That's what I mean. She could get a little bit mad or testy sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the only thing I can remember that actually surprised me.
Tell me about her sense of humor.
Her sense of humor, it was kind of wry, but it was more in her writing that it was brilliant. Her sense of humor was about like you and I, or, Betty, or, it was there when you were talking to her, but it was incredible in her writing, just incredible. And that's interesting about her writing, because she can be really super serious and then really funny in the next poem.
Does anything in particular come to mind when you think about her poetry and her humor?
Well, I love the Buck Owens poem. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. There's one about evolution, that's two about evolution that are very funny. I brought them with me, where she talks about overhearing a conversation in Bakersfield at a restaurant about evolution.
Do you want to look for it?
Sure.
Okay.
I think I know where it is. I think I put it up front here. It's called, I don't want to read the whole poem, Overheard in Wyatt's Cafeteria, Bakersfield, California. And they're talking about the Supreme Court outlining the teaching of creationism. And this one old man tells the other guy, young man, 72 Nobel Prize winners urged the Supreme Court to reject creationism. A big okie in the next booth hears this statement too. His ruddy face flushes redder, and he asks his woman companions, Verla, what in the hell business is it of the Supreme Court what we people thinks about creation? It's already been created. And then the second poem is Verla's answer, and she says, it ain't none of their business, but them judges is scared to death that there may be a God that would sure enough take the wheels off their little red wagons.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's a favorite poem too. But yeah, I loved her humor. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just great.
Did you share her poetry or her writing with anyone, or did you introduce?
Oh yeah, but it's hard to get people to read poetry. You know, I'd send poems here and there to people, and I don't know of anyone who said, "Oh yeah, give me her book." I mean, I've given her books to people, but to get people to sit down and read a book of poetry is really hard. Sad. Mm-hmm. That's the way it is.
Do you have any particular favorite?
Well, the ones I've mentioned, these are favorites, the evolution one and the abortionist. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, probably Prince Albert Wind is just lovely. But I remember I reread her poems I kind of wanted to put a collection of her spiritual poetry. So I went through her books marking them. And she, a lot of times you read them and you go, oh, this is my favorite poem when you're reading them. Mm-hmm. So, but just because of over the years, these are the ones that I remember and I can bring to mind without having to look up.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you saw the scope of her spiritual poetry in that way and thought it would be nice to have a collection of it. I agree. I think you could do that with several different themes in her poetry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, maybe someday I'll do it.
Or
you can do it, Karen. You can do it. You're welcome. Because
I already did. Do you still have your notes?
I do have some of my notes. I can send them to you. If that's something you want to do, let me know.
Okay, I will. But her literary rights are at UC Merced. So anything that would be published that would be her writing would go through them. Mm.
Okay, so you know all that legal stuff.
I don't know all of it. I know that you have to work with them for it.
It'd be hard, and it's like well, I'm still working, so there's just my bandwidth is pretty low. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to see it done. Mm-hmm. Be nice.
It would be. Is there anything about her that was an influence on you? Either personally or writing?
Well, all your friends are an influence on you in some way. I mean, my life is just richer because of her. It really is.
That's a beautiful statement.
Yeah.
Was there any?
She was, by the way, very encouraging to me of my writing.
Was she?
Yeah. And at that time I was writing for the Fresno Bee a lot. And she was just always very positive and very encouraging. She wasn't, she wasn't like selfish about her own, even though said she held court. She was always very supportive. And I introduced Betty to her because I knew Betty was a good writer. Mm-hmm. And she and Betty just hit it off like that. And I was kind of like, well, she was my friend first. But she was always very encouraging of Betty's writing, even though Betty was busy being a lawyer and didn't write much. But she was very encouraging to Betty. Mm-hmm. So she was supportive of other writers, which was nice.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about introducing Betty to Wilma. How did
I said, Betty, you have to meet her. I said, she's from Oklahoma and she's a writer. And I think I sent Betty a few of her poems, and then Betty said, yeah, I want to meet her. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what, I don't remember for sure. Betty can maybe confirm it, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Because I nagged her for a few months before she actually met her.
What do you think people in Oklahoma should know about Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel?
Well, you guys birthed one heck of a poet, and she, although a lot of her writing has to deal with California, she has a lot that's with Oklahoma too in her childhood, a lot. Mm-hmm. So, they can benefit from seeing what her experience was as a child. And they don't have to read a whole novel. They can just read a few short poems. Mm-hmm. And then to see what the experience was in California for some of their relatives who left. Mm-hmm. It's really sweet. And it's sweet how in California they still maintain their kind of Okie heritage and ways, and it's nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that stands out to me as well. How centered she stayed with her Oklahoma roots, but also how her roots in California grew.
Yeah.
And she
embraced it.
She did. Her poem, A Pair of Rivers, really
I don't know that one.
Expresses that eloquently. Did you ever get one of the little blue booklets? Did Betty give you one of those that Jim Clebda and I worked on?
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I'll give you one of those.
Yeah, I'd love it.
She's been gone now for 15 years, I think.
Was it 2003?
2007 when she passed.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah. How do you think she should be remembered?
Well, as a great writer who captured the experience of being an Okie and the Dust Bowl and growing up, and that kind of close to the earth kind of life, and then coming into the modern world. Although she was pretty much spared the internet age. Although she was fascinated by the World Wide Web. Because one time I went over to her house and said, Kathy, I'm on the internet. I think Jim had put some stuff up about Wilma on the internet. She says, you can find me on the internet now.
Oh, that's cute. That's a great story. Yeah. I think she changed with the times without losing who she was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she did. And she, yeah. I was always surprised that Opal died before she did. I was not. Opal seemed much healthier. When you were asking me, was she frail or strong? Mm-hmm. Opal appeared like a workhorse next to Wilma. And Wilma, I never would have guessed that Wilma outlived her many years, not just a few. She outlived her many years. Mm-hmm. So, Yeah, and I remember Wilma was impressed with our parish priest, Father Dan. He went to go visit Opal in Tulare. They had moved to Tulare, but even though I guess they had called him and asked him to come pray, and Opal opened her eyes and he was kneeling at her bed praying for her. And Wilma was impressed with that and loved that. And Opal too. And I called Father Dan years later to say, Father Dan, you remember Wilma and Opal? He did not remember him. Mm-hmm. And I described the scene at the hospital with him kneeling at the bed. And he says, Kathy, do you know how many people whose beds I kneel at?
Oh.
I said, oh, I guess you're right, Father. It was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I can vaguely, when I described him, he says, I vaguely remember them, but he didn't have any distinct memories that could be helpful to Betty at the time.
Do you recall if there was a memorial service for Opal?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm sure there was, but I don't remember it.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't remember. Yeah. Opal was a sweet lady. Oh my gosh, she was sweet. Very happy. I mean, they were different, like you were asking about the personalities. Mm-hmm. Wilma was more serious and more grumpy, But Opal was just kind of a sunny personality.
Were they tall women?
Anybody's taller than me. I recall Opal being taller. Wilma, she's a little taller than me, I think. So I'm a bad judge of that.
Oh, did you feel like they made special preparations when you would go visit?
No, I didn't feel like there was cookies made or anything like that, but I didn't feel unwelcome or anything. Mm-hmm. So California is not as hospitable as the South.
Oh.
I'm sure the kids were given treats now and then from Opal. Mm-hmm. I do seem to remember her doing some baking now that you mention it, but I wasn't zoned in on that. Mm-hmm.
Do your children have memories of that?
Lauren, my oldest daughter, remembers her a little bit, but not very well. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe if she were listening to this interview, it would jog her memory, mm-hmm. and she might remember some things. But a lot of times they went off to play while I visited Wilma. Mm-hmm. So when when she was living in that retirement community, they'd go outside and play while I visited with her. So, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you brought in your folder that you would like to share?
I think we managed to cover most of the things that were in my mind. Just basically, that she really appreciated the simple as well as the intellectual. She didn't, her intellectual abilities didn't mock those with simple wisdom. Mm-hmm. She recognized that someone with simple wisdom could be smart or smarter than those with intellectual wisdom. And You
saved everything all these years.
I saved all the correspondence, and I know I have those newsletters in my files somewhere. I think I know where they are. On the way over, I was thinking, why couldn't I find them yesterday? But on the way over, I remembered where I think I have them. Mm-hmm. So I saved all. I don't think I ever threw anything she sent me away. So I have everything.
You valued it?
I do. Mm-hmm. I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a treasure. And I have a note that I send I call it Last Affairs. It's a note where there are instructions to my daughter where to find everything in the house and what to do with stuff. And I have one note on here. And I think right now it says, talk to Betty about these or the Tulare, and I'll add you to it about these. And I just say they're very valuable and you shouldn't, I know they're not valuable financially, but, they're a treasure. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if she'll value it when the time comes. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So, but that's the best I can do.
It's hard to say. I think sometimes as we grow older, things carry a different meaning for us.
Well, I think when she opens it and starts reading some of the notes that Wilma wrote to me, Wilma comes alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like while you're doing an audio history, when people hear someone's voices, they come more alive than in a picture.
Mm-hmm.
And same with writing, people come alive. I mean, I can read the ancient Greeks and they come alive as if they were here right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when my daughter, and she's really sharp, I think when she reads some of these notes and they're to her mother,
Yes,
I think she's going to value it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'll have to include a link to this audio
Yes,
in this file.
yes, yeah, that's good. Is there anything that I haven't asked that
I
you would
can't
like
think
to
of
share?
anything. No,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything that you were hoping to share. So I think those are all the questions that I have.
Oh, I do remember one thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm a devout Catholic, very conservative. And Wilma was published in these very left-wing publications out of San Francisco, some of whom the writers were witches. And I said, Wilma, how do you justify being published in these magazines? Yeah, they need me.
Oh.
Okay, all right, I get it. Yeah.
That is so interesting. Huh.
And that's what she said about all her friends, all those literary friends. She'd always say, Kathy, they need me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they'll like watching that, but that's the truth.
And then that would be the end of any discussion about it.
I didn't argue with her after that. I thought she's right. They do need her poems. Mm-hmm. Who am I to say she shouldn't be published there? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, I will stop the recorder.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a little added information for our interview. It has to do with some of the spiritual poetry that Wilma wrote. And there's one that you mentioned where she talks about Jesus. So can you tell me?
It's a prose piece, actually. It was a story about when Jesus slept on the couch in our house, something like that. And my memory is she met this young man with beard and a hair, and it was in a certain park in Hanford, and she described him and his eyes, and he came and he slept on our house. And the name of it was Jesus Slept Here Last Night. Something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm not positive that's the title, but that was the gist of the poem. And it was so real the way she wrote it. I looked at her and I said, Wilma, did Jesus really sleep with you? Do you really think that was Jesus?
On the couch.
Yeah. She goes, is that a true story? Is it true, Wilma? And she just looked at me like, you idiot, of course it's true. And I just kind of believed her, but I kind of didn't know what to make of it. I'm so naive. If somebody tells me something, I'll believe them, But, I sometimes used to think back on that and think, okay, did she really meet Jesus? Did he really, what do you call it when God comes in, an epiphany? Did she have an epiphany? Maybe that's what it was called, the Epiphany.
Oh, okay.
It could have been that title. And so anyway, and you were telling me of another one that...
Yes, she's in her apartment and she's having a conversation with Jesus, and she has, from what I remember, it sounds like a nosy neighbor, and it interrupts her conversation with Jesus, and she comes across as being annoyed, with the interruption. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Wilma was more special than you and I know.
Would she explain her writing her poetry if you ask questions? Or did she want you to interpret it?
No, she never. It stood on its own. It was pretty simple and easy to understand. I do not like poetry that's hard to understand. I never could read T.S. Eliot. To save my life, I can't read that man. You know, I guess I'm too simple.
I'm with you on that.
So no, it didn't need any explanation.
But when we speak of her writing as being simple, there is
it's deep too.
It is deep. There are some layers of meaning there, I think.
Oh yeah. And what I love, like that evolution poem I was telling you about, the Supreme Court and creationism, it starts out just having lunch on a hot day in Bakersfield. And she just makes the whole restaurant. You can taste the drink, the cold drink that they're having, and hear the clinking and the waiters and the waitresses. You just get it all, and then you get this brilliant little insight about, you know, the Supreme Court and people's beliefs. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that added.
You're welcome.
There.